America's remote work havens. And go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called America's Remote Work Havens. Actually, another way of putting it is the places where you can live and work freely and remotely without the state constantly being in your business. That's really what this podcast is about. And so what is a remote work haven? Well, it's just that. It's the cities, towns, states where you can go work and not be told, hey, you better be vaccinated or else you can't work, or you have to live in, side the city and you can't live in single family housing, or you have to put solar panels on your rooftop. I mean, we can go down the list of all the things that states, at least the blue states, are trying to make you do and make you feel guilty about doing. And there comes a point in everybody's life where they're just like, I just want to live free. I want to be free. I want the government, which has gotten way too big, to stop telling me what it is that I need to do. And I want the government to start listening to me so that I can tell them, just shut up already. Just shut up and focus on the basic services of government. So in an article, and this is in LinkedIn, America's New Remote Work Havens, 20 Cities That Pursue Faraway Jobs by George Anders. He's a senior editor at large at LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn has editors and writers. Jess Lupo loves Orlando, and not just because of the warm, sunny climate. It's her old college town, and that means lots of friends from her days at the University of Central Florida are nearby. The job scene, however, is a lot trickier, especially for ambitious college graduates like her. Orlando's biggest employer is Disney World. No surprise there. The rest of the local economy tilts heavily toward relatively low-paying jobs in leisure and hospitality. For Lupo and many other Floridians, the solution is clear. Stay in the Sunshine State, where housing costs don't break the bank, she explains. But find an out-of-state job that's exciting, pays well, and can be done anywhere amid this boom in remote work. Pretty cool, huh? So you might have this really high-paying employer in New York or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. or Silicon Valley, and you work remotely in the state that's actually free, which is what she is suggesting. Fresh data from LinkedIn Economic Graph Team provides two important new insights about the way the rise of remote work, initially dictated by 2020's pandemic restrictions, is reshaping the U.S. economy. And by the way, this is like, if there ever were something that affected millennials or that millennials were driving, this would be it, right? I want to live wherever I want to live, and I want to work where I want to work, and I want to do so remotely. And I don't want to have to show up at an office, and I can be just as productive at home. And that, by the way, is probably true of many people, but I got to tell you, it's not true of all people. Not all people have the discipline to work from home. For starters, remote work opportunities as of August were capturing 30.2% of all applications to paid U.S. job postings on LinkedIn. That's been plenty of anecdotal evidence of remote work's rise, but the LinkedIn data makes it possible to see just how substantial this rise has been. August's remote application activity turns out to be more than triple the rate of 9.8% in August of 2020. It's up nearly tenfold from remote work's mere 2.8% share in January of 2020 before COVID-19 hit. What's less well recognized and every bit as intriguing is the degree to which certain cities, chiefly but not exclusively in the Sun Belt, have become the hotspots for people seeking remote work, as seen in the chart below. The chart above covers the 12-month period through August 2021. During that span, the overall national rate for remote job application on LinkedIn was 21.3%. That's huge. That's huge. A fifth of the U.S. workforce working remotely. And so far, staying that way and potentially growing. And so you heard correctly, the Sun Belt states primarily. And so if you, podcast listener, here's the question for you. If you could have a job, or if you do have a job that is, technology related. You're behind a computer for the most part doing what you need to do, and it can be done remotely. Would you actually live where you're living now? Would you really choose to live there? Or would you choose to live somewhere else? And if you were to live that somewhere else, because you could work remotely and be paid, where would that be? And I strongly suspect you won't be moving to California willingly, New York willingly. I mean, a few might, but the vast majority, no. I don't think you'll be moving to, remote parts of Canada just because of the weather. And I don't think you're going to be moving to places like Chicago, Illinois, where, you have massive crime and decay. You're probably going to move to places where the government runs the state and the localities really well. And so here are the larger metropolitan areas where people are moving to who want to work remotely. And remember, this is what they're choosing to do. So this is a huge data point. Cape Coral, Florida. Charleston, South Carolina. By the way, I've been in Cape Coral, Florida. That is in the greater Fort Myers area. I think Christopher, our producer, has been there as well. Cape Coral, Florida. It's a middle-class town. Really cool. And I'm not saying that there aren't nice homes there. There are plenty of nice homes there, too. Those homes, of course, are on the water. But Cape Coral's right on the Gulf. Charleston, South Carolina. Tampa Bay area, Florida. Jacksonville, Florida. Orlando, Florida. Hampton Roads, Virginia. Omaha, Nebraska. Louisville, Kentucky. Las Vegas, Nevada. And Salt Lake City, Utah. What do these towns, for the most part, have in common? Well, they're in states that are red, and they are in regions that are also red. And maybe the exception to that would potentially be Hampton Roads, Virginia. But remember, Hampton Roads is a relatively populated area along the Atlantic. Or is that is that the Chesapeake Bay? No, I think that's the Atlantic, actually. That is the Atlantic, because that's where the big shipbuilding facilities are. And the Navy has a huge facility there. Newport News, Hampton Roads, etc. And you have tons of military contractors that are there living off the teat of the federal government. So those military contractors who maybe previously were living maybe in New York or maybe California have probably chosen to move to Hampton Roads because that's where their primary client is located. The shipbuilding facilities and the sub-building facilities and the United States Navy and the big contractors obviously want to have some sort of presence there. And if you go there and visit there, you're probably saying to yourself, well, this is a lot nicer than New York, a lot nicer than California, a lot nicer than Chicago. I'm going to just move here. So that would be like the one exception to the rule, but there's a reason, because it's primarily government. The rest of them are all red states. They're all red cities. They're all red towns, without question. And the interesting thing about this is these remote jobs tend to be pretty high-paying jobs, if not very high-paying jobs. And so those high-paying jobs, because they have become mobile, have allowed the millennial population, the millennial segment of our population, which is the largest segment of our population after the baby boomers, although the baby boomers are dying off, they're moving to these areas and they're saying, well, to heck with New York, to heck with Chicago, to heck with California, and to heck with the Northeast, like Connecticut and these ridiculous places that just are constantly in my business. And so that's why we're calling this podcast America's Remote Work Havens, because it's not just as simple as, hey, these are havens for working, and because they're really nice environments and so forth. What makes a nice environment has a lot more to do than just the weather. It also has to do with the people that you're around, and the fact that, as I've said before, the government is out of your business. And proof in point is we have a federal government that's telling you you can't work unless you get vaccinated. And we're hearing lots of information and data, and I know you have too, podcast listeners, of people who are millennials who are forced to get the vaccination, and there are side effects. So I'm not here to provide medical advice, podcast listeners. That's not my job. I'm just here to provide information. And I think really the issue about vaccination versus not vaccination is about freedom. It's about freedom. It's up to you. And Governor DeSantis of Florida gets it because he has, I think, 6 of the top 20 cities in his state where millennials want to go and where people who work remotely want to go, and they want to take their money and say, goodbye, New York, goodbye, Chicago, Illinois, goodbye, California, goodbye, Connecticut, goodbye, New Jersey. I'm out of here. Well, here's DeSantis on this vaccine mandate nonsense. And this goes to what government is supposed to do. It's supposed to protect its citizens. Here's the clip.
Session, SB 2006, that did a lot of different things. It prevented private businesses from requiring proof of vaccination to just do normal things like go to a movie or go to a restaurant, vaccine passports. But that also applied to government agencies. And so if a government agency in the state of Florida forces a vaccine as a condition to employment, that violates Florida law, and you will face...
So this vaccine mandate goes to the greater question of how government has overreached with the idea of saying you can't travel, you can't work unless you have a vaccine. And then here you have a governor that's saying, oh no, businesses who are asking for proof for vaccination or government agencies mandating vaccination for employees will be facing $5,000 fines per violation in the state of Florida, said Governor Ron DeSantis. Pretty straightforward. You do not have a right to tell people how to conduct their own health care and what to do with their bodies. I'm sorry, when it comes to something as simple as a vaccination, and I know we have podcast listeners out there who are going, what about the Texas abortion law? Well, quite frankly, you have 2 lives there. You don't just have one. With a vaccination, you have your own life, and you have that decision to make. And so DeSantis in May signed a bill allowing the state to issue fines beginning September 16th if people are asked to show proof they have received a COVID-19 vaccine before being allowed in businesses, schools, or government buildings, WFTV9 reported. According to the legislation, businesses, government agencies, and schools in the state of Florida will be fined $5,000 per individual and separate violation. And can I tell you something? This really goes to, in my opinion, millennial thought, but also critical thinking and critical thinkers out there, and millennials in particular, who are just like, who are you to tell me I can't walk into your restaurant because I don't have a vaccine passport? Who are you? I mean, who are you protecting? Who are you to tell me I can't walk into a government building or walk into a business or work at a company? I mean, this really is, podcast listeners, a freedom issue and proof of why so many people are leaving states like New York. In the Gateway Pundit, New Yorkers are chanting the expletive F Joe Biden as they march on the Brooklyn Bridge against mandatory vaccines. Now, I want to tell you something. While we do have a clip of this, and you can hear what they're saying, as you can imagine, that's all they're saying, and they're holding up signs, they're walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. When you look at these people, you know what I see? I see black, Hispanic, white, and what I really see, they're all millennials. All millennials. I think I saw one guy that looked like he was a baby boomer. The rest were all millennials. Just like, stop it already. Stop telling us what we need to do. Stop it. Okay? Stay out of our lives. And as the Democrat Party continues to overreach, you're going to see more of these individuals saying, you know what, maybe if I can get a job that allows me to work remotely, I can move to some other state. Well, here's the clip of the New Yorkers protesting on the Brooklyn Bridge. Here it is. Now, I don't think, I have to admit, podcast listeners, I don't think this is particularly creative. I think you can get a lot more creative with your protesting instead of, using the expletive. But this goes to where people are in America, in particular millennials, who are just tired of this. And I find it kind of interesting because the Democrat Party better be very careful, because if it starts losing millennials on the freedom issues, and we know the Democrat Party is not about freedom anymore, they are going to lose elections, including in blue states. And to prove how messed up the Democrats are, and any reasonable person who listens to this is going to agree, I believe. We played this yesterday about how Steve Ducey asked Jen Psaki about the vaccine mandate and how it applies to illegal immigrants crossing the border. We played it yesterday, but this ties into this whole freedom issue and the idea that you start looking at government and you start shaking your head and going, I need to find a refuge in this country, some other state to live in, where they actually respect my rights and they respect my freedom. They respect the Bill of Rights and they respect the Constitution. We're going to replay that clip. Here it is.
Why is it that you're trying to require anybody with a job or anybody who goes to school to get the COVID-19 vaccine, but you are not requiring that of migrants that continue walking across the southern border into the country?
Well, look, our objective is to get as many people vaccinated across the country as humanly possible. And so the president's announcement yesterday was an effort to empower businesses, to give businesses the tools to protect their workforces. That's exactly what we did. But certainly we want everybody to get vaccinated, and more people are vaccinated, whether they are migrants or whether they are workers, protects more people in the United States.
But it's a requirement for people at a business with more than 100 people. It is not a requirement for migrants at the southern border. Why?
That's correct. Go ahead.
That's right. It's a requirement to get vaccinated in order to work and in order to travel. But if you're traveling across the border illegally, no, you don't have to be vaccinated. So millennials are watching these clips. Millennials are listening. Millennials are watching TV. Millennials are hearing this and they're saying to themselves, I want to be free. And by the way, that was Peter Ducey, not Steve Ducey. Steve Ducey is his dad on Fox News. By the way, they look exactly alike. Peter Ducey being the reporter and part of the White House correspondence. And he shows up there and always hits Jen Psaki with these very crisp, common sense questions. And Jen Psaki, I got to give her some creds here. She answered that one pretty honestly, as we talked about yesterday. But this podcast, the idea that there are remote work havens is really important, because in a federal system like we have in the United States, you have places to go to. You have places of refuge to go to. For example, every state, the states have state rights, and you can go to those states and you can move from state to state. But we've heard recently that even CNN and their doctor want to tell people they can't cross state lines unless they're vaccinated. So the more people, I think, hear this nonsense, I think the more you're going to see folks leaving places like New York. I mean, once again, they were all millennials, and leaving places like Chicago and leaving places like California, in particular Los Angeles and Silicon Valley and Connecticut and New Jersey, and just say, you know what? I just want to be left alone already. I just want to be left alone. And thank God for this federal system that gives citizens the options of living in states that are much better run and that are free. So listen to this podcast, listeners. AOC wears a tax the rich dress. So AOC, Miss Socialist Marxist from the state of New York, of course. I'm not sure if she represents Manhattan. I think she represents one of the boroughs. I don't know which one. But in any event, AOC wears tax the rich dress to a Met Gala. And here it is in the New York Post. Well, isn't that rich? Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is the face of the Democrat Socialists of America, showed up to the glitzy Met Gala wearing a political message seemingly aimed at her fellow party goers. So she's making fun of the people that she's going to this gala with. Ocasio-Cortez wore a white gown by Brother Vellies. Is that how you say it? Vellies? I don't know. With tax the rich in red letters splashed across her back and accessorized with a matching slogan on her bag to the America-themed ball. The 31-year-old representative, who is the darling of the far left, could have found a more receptive audience to her sartorial statement at a workers' rally. The Met Gala is an exclusive event, which is a parade of millionaire pop stars, wealthy actors, trust fund society swans, and members of the glitterati. But by the way, it's also about raising money for the Met, right? It's also about the nonprofit and raising money for it so that it can continue. Indeed, for the 2021 Met Gala, individual tickets were $35,000 and tables started at $200,000. The Post has learned. Still, AOC's style collaborator, Aurora James of Brother Valley's, said the gala was the perfect venue for such a sartorial statement. We can never get too comfortable in our seats at the table once they've been given. James, founder and creative director of Brother Valley's, told Vogue, "We must always continue to push ourselves, push our colleagues, push the culture, and push the country forward. Fashion is changing, America is changing, and as far as this theme goes, I think Alexandria and I are a great embodiment of the language fashion needs to consider adding to the general lexicon as we work towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and empowered future." Jesus. These people are insane. They're trying to make a political statement at a fundraiser. Granted, the fundraiser is occupied by wealthy people who are giving their money to support the Met, so that people who can't afford to go to the Met can afford to go to the Met, and so that this masterpiece gets to be preserved for the future. How do you think these buildings get built anyway? How do you think they get supported and perpetuated anyway? By the rich, because these are people that are using their wealth to support. Well, of course, AOC wants nothing to do with this, except she does. She's there. she's wearing a gown that says "tax the rich." She doesn't want to be there because these rich people are bad, but she's hanging out with the rich people. I mean, what a tool. Well, we have a clip on this, and it's Vogue magazine interviewing her. And listen to what she says. Here it is.
Tax the rich. What a model, AOC. Wow, I didn't know you model as well.
When Aurora and I were first kind of partnered, we really started having a conversation about what it means to be working class women of color at the Met. And we said, we can't just play along, but we need to break the fourth wall and challenge some of the institutions. And while the Met is known for its spectacle, we should have a conversation about it.
So, the Met is known for its spectacle, says AOC, but we should have a conversation about it. In other words, she sounds like a dictator saying, well, I'm AOC, and I'm here with a tax the rich gown, $30,000 gown, and I want to have a conversation about whether the Met should really be here, because I get to decide that. I mean, should it really be here? I mean, who does this woman think she is? I mean, why would anyone follow her? Do you have any? This is what's wrong. Part of what's wrong with America and part of what's wrong with the blue states is that people are so poorly educated. They don't even know the history of the Met. They don't even know how these great institutions were built. They don't even know why these great institutions stand. They just want to tear them down. But they also want to go to the parties and hobnob with the rich. And that's the ultimate Democrat, because we know they're all tools. So the Twitterverse erupted over Ocasio's dress because she decided to post on Twitter, "The medium is the message." And of course, she's posing with her backside of the dress that says "tax the rich." And so then Dave Portnoy, you all know Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports, he put "tax the rich, but first I'm gonna have the time of my life partying with them at the most extravagant, over-the-top party of the year that is essentially a celebration of richness." Basically, slamming AOC. And then Jerry Dunleavy, AOC wanted to hang out with a bunch of rich celebs at a cool party without losing her socialist street cred, so she tossed "tax the rich" on the back of her dress and called it a day. It's not much more complicated than that. Well done. Also tweeted out by Donald Trump Jr. I actually haven't read this one yet, but I can only imagine. Donald Trump Jr. What makes AOC a bigger fraud? The "tax the rich" dress, while she's hanging out with a bunch of wealthy left-wing elites, or the lack of masks after spending the past 18 months as one of the biggest authoritarian mask Karens in the country? Way to go, Donald Trump Jr. And then Jay Nordlinger, All my life, I've heard tax the rich. Some people even put it on dresses. According to the latest data, the top 1% of earners in America pay 40.1% of the federal taxes. The bottom 90% pay 28.6%. Come on. If you want more revenue, look to the middle. Wow. And then Jay Nordlinger, this will be the last tweet on this, but he wrote, "No one will tell the truth to people. They would rather engage in populist BS. They lead people to believe that Richie Riches with swimming pools and private jets can and should fund their dreams. Give me a politician, even a pundit, who will level with the people." And that was just part of the Twitterverse, and it just went on and on and on because of her stupid dress and the fact that, most reasonable Americans can look right through AOC and understand that she's at this party because she wants to have a good time. And she wants to hobnob with the rich, because the way you get reelected in politics and the way you move up in politics is to get those rich people to give you donations. And AOC wants to run for the United States Senate against Chucky Schumer. And the only way she can do that is if she raises millions of dollars. So she's hobnobbing with those people that can donate to her campaign millions of dollars. And then she gives them cover by wearing this dress, because I really think that's what this is. It's just cover. Tax the rich so that I can have fun, as they said on the Twitterverse. So get this, podcast listeners. We have, of course, Larry Elder, who, of course, will be either the new governor of California, or we're going to have to keep the same governor, maybe, Gavin Newsom. Obviously, I'm hoping Larry Elder wins, and that election is today. So it's very likely that at the time of this airing of Mark and the Millennials, the election results will begin to come in from California. Well, no, actually they won't, because they're several hours behind. So they actually won't begin to come in because, in California, you keep voting until you get the election results that you want. So there is that. So it wouldn't really matter whether they're behind or not. So the LA Times has been hitting Larry Elder nonstop, the LA Times newspaper. And you won't believe what they are saying about Larry Elder. Larry Elder is a radio host personality. He's been doing this for many years in the state of California. I think he's probably the most listened to radio host in the state of California. He happens to be black. Well, that, of course, is a threat to the Democrat establishment in California, who, of course, has used race to divide people. And the LA Times has hit a new low because they called Larry Elder a white supremacist. I mean, can you imagine? How do you call Larry Elder a white supremacist? It just doesn't seem like that anyone would believe that. But yet, there is a columnist at the LA Times, and her name is Jean Guerrero, and she has been hitting Elder nonstop in the newspaper and doing investigative journalism about how he is a white supremacist. He's black. That's not possible. So Brian Stelter, the complete idiot on CNN, decides to interview Jean Guerrero of the LA Times about her article about the white supremacist Larry Elder. We have this clip, and it's about a minute long or so. It's worth listening to, because if you don't live in California, you will know what is going on there and what they're saying to trash this guy so that Newsom can get back in. If you do live in California, then you're probably already aware of this, and it's got to make your blood boil. We have that clip, and here it is.
You've been such an outspoken critic of Elder. He's well known to right-wing radio listeners as a host for decades, but then he has sparred with the media that's been covering the campaign. He's clearly the leading contender among the Republicans in this recall. So do you think he was able to get around the media and reach voters in California? Was he able to run a Trump playbook in the state?
I mean, kind of. He's essentially been running his campaign on Fox News and on right-wing media outlets. He's refused to talk to large, to nonpartisan and media outlets and to journalists who are critical of him. Has refused to answer difficult questions. Often uses the few interviews that he does give as an opportunity to give a performance on social media. Denouncing those journalists and playing the victim. But he has been able to reach the minority of voters in California who embrace his white supremacist worldview. And he's co-opted this line by my fellow columnist from the headline, calling him the blackface of white supremacy.
Can you imagine? He is a white supremacist. That is what a reporter, someone who calls herself a reporter at the Los Angeles Times newspaper, and she's been writing this time and again. And of course, as you can imagine, she decides to put these articles in the Los Angeles Times right around the election. How convenient, right? Right up to the election, you just happen to run a story that you have created yourself, that a black man who's running for governor of California is a white supremacist. I just can't repeat that enough. It does not make sense. And that isn't even enough for the LA Times, because then they've also called Larry Elder a model minority who says what whites love to hear about black people. I got to tell you, journalism in America, at least journalism that is the mainstream traditional journalism, is dead. It's gone. It's dead. Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, New York Times, Baltimore Sun, all dead. California Republican gubernatorial candidate Larry Elder came under a racially charged attack in the media yet again Monday, as a columnist called him a model minority who says the things white people love to hear about black people. Who says things white people love to hear about black people. I cannot imagine anyone on the right ever saying something even close to this. It's disgusting. Elder, a black conservative radio host who tops Republican polls in the crowded California recall election to potentially replace Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom, was framed by Los Angeles Times columnist Frank Shyung as a token African American who flatters white Republicans' racial anxieties. The term model minority was a specific history in the Asian American community. So the term model minority, according to this writer, has a specific history in the Asian American community. But I can't think of a better embodiment of its concepts than Larry Elder, the black Republican gubernatorial candidate who has made a career of saying the things white people love to hear about black people, Shyung wrote. Jeez. Due to Elder's opposition to Black Lives Matter and rejection of the notion of systemic racism, Shyung argued his candidacy comforted the most racist wings of the GOP. And I don't think Elder's sudden prominence is an accident, he wrote. Fielding a model minority candidate will probably become a common electoral strategy for the largely white Republican Party as it attempts to maintain control of a rapidly diversifying nation. Model minority candidates can help affirm far-right perspectives on racism while offering a defense against the charge that Republican Party is too white. The black conservatives, such as Senator Tim Scott, Republican South Carolina, and Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas have frequently faced charges from the left of being sellouts of their own race, with some even using the derogatory Uncle Tom slur for blacks viewed as too deferential to whites. Elder's surge in polls has prompted aggressive reporting into his past and a special interest from columnists into his status as a black Republican who supports Donald Trump. However, a woman in a gorilla mask throwing an egg at his head last week drew little mainstream media outrage. The model minority term, Shyung wrote, stemmed from whites in the 1960s, downplaying racism against African Americans by pointing to financial success for Japanese and Chinese Americans. Elder was a perfect model minority because he downplays white supremacy, touts his own success as proof against racism, and embraces the bootstraps narrative that anyone conceded in the United States, Shyung claimed. Can you imagine? Here is someone at the Los Angeles Times, this guy, Shyung, a reporter, and he's saying that it's not appropriate for a black candidate to talk about bootstrapping yourself out of poverty, moving up the ladder, working hard, and making something of yourself. That is wrong, that Larry Elder shouldn't be doing that. And that's nothing more than a narrative because it's not possible. Democrat or Republican, and no matter what race you are, I guarantee that you don't want to elect a model minority candidate if they've decided to sell out their own people. Why would they treat the rest of us any better? He wrote. I mean, podcast listeners, Larry Elder is the candidate in the race who wants to provide school choice to the poorest of the poor in the state of California. The idea that the money for your school doesn't follow the school, it follows your child, and that your child can go to a private school if they want, or a charter school or public school. They could even go to a boarding school. And who cares if they go to a school that's out of state, as long as your parents maintain their residency in the state. If your kid's better off going to a boarding school because he's growing up in a really dangerous neighborhood and you want your child to be safe, that should be an option. This is what Larry Elder wants. And so therefore, Larry Elder's being called, an Uncle Tom, and somebody who is a white supremacist and a model minority. And this is all up to the election, which is being held today in California, the recall election, so that they can sandbag him. And then they brought Kamala Harris back, who doesn't talk to anybody, the media or anyone, never talks policy about anything. And she does the ultimate redirection in California as she campaigns for Gavin Newsom. The ultimate redirection. And when you listen to this clip, podcast listeners, think to yourself, what redirection is she engaging in and why? Listen carefully. We had that clip and here it is.
What's happening in Texas? What's happening in Georgia? What's happening around our country with these policies that are about attacking women's rights, reproductive rights, voting rights, workers' rights? They think if they can win in California, they can do this anywhere. Well, we will show them you're not going to get this done. Not here, never.
So she's talking about other states. Other states and what they do in those states, it does not affect California. California is its own sovereign state. They get to do what they want. But no, Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States and a Californian, is telling the people of California, look at Texas, look at Georgia, look what they're doing in those states. It's just terrible. That's redirection. Because all you need to do is walk down the street in California and all you see is squalor and homelessness. And it's getting worse. And drug use and open air drug markets and feces on and trash everywhere. I mean, it's ridiculous. So it's redirection. Californians, not look in your backyard. Don't look at the vagrants in your front yard and on the sidewalk in front of your house. Don't think about how bad things have gotten in this state. Don't think about how you don't have electricity sometimes because there's insufficient power. Don't think about how poorly the state has been run. Don't think about how poorly Gavin Newsom has managed this pandemic and done completely the opposite of what he's telling you to do. Don't look at that. Look at Texas and look at Georgia. And of course, unfortunately, because so many people don't have an education in American history and the way our government works, they might actually think, oh yeah, that's terrible what they're doing in Texas and Georgia. I mean, oh my gosh, they might bring it here. And what is it that they're going to bring? Like try to make the elections more secure so that you have to actually vote in person? Stop ballot harvesting? Maybe let people go to private schools? I mean, maybe tell people to get jobs and stop living on the street? And maybe provide them more assistance and health care and mental health services. I mean, clearly, any reasonable person would know that Larry Elder would do a better job than Gavin Newsom. I mean, and what's sad about this is the LA Times, of course, in a paper in Los Angeles, a city that is a fraction of itself of 25 years ago, doesn't care. They just want to sandbag Larry Elder. And so there's an article that's out there. It says, it's entitled about Here it is. Parents in California want Newsom out. It's really interesting. And I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to characterize it for you that there are parents in California and large amounts of the Hispanic community that really want Newsom out because many of these individuals are business owners. And I've always said this, as more and more minorities in the United States, Hispanics and blacks in particular, become business people, and they realize how anti-business the Democrat Party is, how anti-small business the Democrat Party is in particular, and how they're against freedom, that those individuals will want change. And so many of those individuals, and they spoke to this in the article, want Newsom out. And it's got to scare Gavin Newsom and the Democrats terribly when you see, thousands of Hispanics out there wanting to support Larry Elder. I mean, they have to be terrified because remember, it was the Democrat Party that wanted, as many Hispanics coming in across the border as possible, primarily from Mexico and into California, because that's how they won the state. And now, wouldn't it be interesting if that backfired? And I think that will eventually happen. I'm not sure if it's going to happen today, but boy, wouldn't it be great? And it would be great for the citizens of California because they might actually be able to save it. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. And guess what? The CEO of Salesforce is back. Oh, God, this guy is such a tool. So there's an uproar over Texas's near total abortion ban, which has led big tech firms and some local governments, including Connecticut and the city of Chicago, to offer sanctuary to workers who want to change. But it may take more than values to woo residents away. Well, let's tell you what the CEO, of course, of Salesforce decided to do. He put, and his name is, by the way, Mark Benioff. He said, if you want to move, we'll help you exit Texas. It's your choice. And he puts a big heart there. So he's responding to people because some people are out in Texas and they're tweeting and they're saying they're against the abortion law restrictions in Texas. And so the CEO of Salesforce is like, well, we're going to take care of you if you just come back here. And he's not even saying Salesforce employees. So here's the article. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff said the company will help employees move out of Texas if they so choose after the state's Republican governor signed a strict ban on abortions. He, quote, Ohana, if you want to move, we'll help you exit Texas, Benioff tweeted Friday, sharing a link to a CNBC article about the company's decision. Ohana is a Hawaiian word that encompasses blood and accepted family. Okay. The new law bans abortions as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy in Texas, becoming the nation's most restrictive measure on abortions. The law also allows civilians to sue anyone who helps someone get or performs an abortion for up to $10,000. In a Slack message last week, Salesforce told employees, these are incredibly personal issues that directly impact many of us, especially women, according to CNBC, which obtained a copy of the memo. We recognize and respect that we all have deeply held and different perspectives. As a company, we stand with all our women at Salesforce and everywhere. And this is Mark Benioff, the Salesforce CEO. I mean, he's running this huge company and he's constantly opining in politics and getting involved in it. It's like, just shut up and stay out of it and run your company and let your employees make their own decisions. I'm sure many of your employees, if not most, are working remotely anyway, since we told you at the very beginning of this podcast that this podcast is about being able to live anywhere you want and work remotely. Those employees aren't forced to work in Texas. But by the way, he doesn't want them to stay in the red state. He wants them to move back to the blue state. Now, why do you think they moved to the red state to begin with? Because the quality of life is better. Because it truly is freer. So Salesforce, which owns Slack, is a software company that creates platforms for other businesses, helping them manage customers and data. The San Francisco-based company has office locations around the United States, including in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. CBS News has reached out to Salesforce for further information and is awaiting a response. It was not immediately clear whether any employees had requested to move, but it didn't stop, of course. The CEO of Salesforce from reaching out to his employees and to other employees and other people that live in Texas and saying, oh my gosh, you gotta move. You gotta move. So in Cal Matters magazine, it says, a pitch to Texans. Mark Benioff, CEO of San Francisco-based software giant Salesforce, tweeted on Friday his employees, about 1,000 in Dallas, as their technical reported, that if you want to move, we'll help you exit Texas. It's your choice. So, as you can imagine, in this go woke or go broke, what we have here is something that's very different. It's a CEO that sees that he has employees in fast-growing red states, and he's trying to move them to the blue states, back to them, and he doesn't get the fact that so far none of them want to move back because they don't feel threatened. Probably in part because in a federal system, as we've said to you folks out there in podcast land, you can still live in Texas and you can go to another state. And if another state has the kind of abortion laws that you want, then you can go to that other state. It's the beautiful thing. But the libs, man, the progressives, they want every state to be the same. That's not allowed. They want everything to be the same. They don't want you to have choices because they're Stalinists. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the daily Biden dumpster fire. And it's a good one. It's a really good daily Biden dumpster fire. So the White House, you won't believe this, the White House abruptly cuts the feed of President Joe Biden mid-sentence as he asks questions at a wildfires briefing. So you got the wildfires happening in California and Nevada, and the president decides that he's going to ask some questions because he's getting information reported to him in this meeting, and he's listening. And as it's fed to him, he's like, hey, I've got a question. And so they cut him off. By they, I mean his staff. So the White House abruptly cut the feed of President Joe Biden's briefing on wildfires with federal and state officials. During Monday's visit to Boise, Idaho, Biden received a briefing about the ongoing wildfires that have plagued several states out west. While Biden spoke for much of the briefing, at one point he said he wanted to hear more from George Geisler of the National Association of State Foresters. And so at that point, Biden wanted to ask, a question. You're president of the United States, you inquiring minds, you want to ask questions. And I'm sure there are tons of questions that could be asked, like, how did it start? How do they generally start? How do we start? Kind of common sense questions. I wouldn't mind knowing these things as well. We have this clip, and here it is.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
One of the things that I've been working on with some others is
so one of the things, can I ask you a question? One of the things I've been working on from others is, and then the plug was pulled. I mean, they just pulled the plug and it was over. And Biden gets up and, he leaves. So podcast listeners, this is a daily Biden dumpster fire for sure, but it also is scary because it's proof that Biden is a mere figurehead. This is proof, ladies and gentlemen, that the president of the United States is not in charge. He's a mere figurehead. Imagine doing such a thing to past presidents. Imagine doing that to Barack Obama. I mean, he would have laid into you. You don't pull the plug. I mean, you may not agree with Obama, but at least he had, the wherewithal to ask questions and to process through them. But they don't have that. The Biden staff doesn't have the confidence that Biden has that capability, because he may have asked for ice cream at the end. He may have said, can I ask you a question? Do you have any ice cream? Who knows? That's what they're afraid of. The staff, are afraid that he might ask a question that just doesn't make any sense at all. So they try to limit his ability, which means He, ladies and gentlemen, this president is not in charge of running the country. This is dangerous stuff. Can you imagine the same thing with George Bush or Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan? They wouldn't have put up with that. I mean, Reagan famously said when he was in a debate, they tried to pull his plug, and he said, I paid for this microphone. I mean, he's there, he's engaged, he's part of it. And of course, later on in Reagan's second term, at the end of it, there were all kinds of reports that he was in mid-stage or early stage, potentially Alzheimer's, which is awful, right? But that was like at the very end. We're at the very beginning of the Biden presidency, ladies and gentlemen, and who is in charge? It's got to be the staff, because they're actually deciding to pull the plug. So the article continues. This isn't the first time the White House intervened in blocking Biden from being heard by the general public. Last month, the president's audio feed was cut as he was able to respond to a reporter's question on his administration's military withdrawal deadline from Afghanistan. In March, the White House cut the feed as Biden said he was happy to take questions while speaking to Democrat lawmakers at a virtual event. The latest incident comes just days after Politico reported how White House staffers will either mute Biden or turn off his remarks out of anxiety that he will veer away from the West Wing's carefully orchestrated messaging. Herein lies the problem. Every president has messaging, no matter who the president is. Every president has speechwriters. Every president has strategists who help him with the messaging. And typically what they do is they say, hey, follow this particular messaging script that we're giving you and don't go off of it. But apparently Biden isn't even capable of doing that. So therefore, they've devised a strategy and a system in the White House and elsewhere to just cut the feed every time he doesn't stay on script. And what a compare and contrast to Donald Trump, right? Trump never stayed on message. I mean, he refused to listen to the experts in the White House. I'm talking about the political experts about how to control a message and build a coalition. It was the opposite. He was completely undisciplined. And now we have another president who's undisciplined as well, but because he's probably in early stage dementia. And you have to wonder, and this is really serious stuff, who is in charge at the White House? We can't have people who are unelected be in charge of the president of the United States and literally being in charge and telling him he can't talk. It's super dangerous, podcast listeners. I can't say this enough. We have to do something about this. And I'm not saying I want the president of the United States impeached. I would just want I want the media to be honest and start talking about this. And maybe saying, hey, look, historically, when was the last time we had a president where the staff pulled the feed kind of on a regular basis as the president was talking for fear of what he might say? When was the last time that happened? And who actually makes that decision? Specifically in the White House, who makes that decision? Who's making the call? Who's saying, hey, Tom, the guy that's doing the sound and the video. Hey, Tom, when I give you the thumbs up, cut it. Who's that guy? What is his name? What's his job title? We have a right to know this. We absolutely have a right to know this. And we must know this as a country because, quite frankly, I kind of wonder if there is some sort of crisis overseas with China. I'm talking about a very serious crisis. If China decides to do something extreme in the world, maybe with Taiwan or others, I kind of wonder who then is going to control that? Who is going to be making that decision? And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.